Hello dear viewers, this is the start of a series that I am working on, where I take fantasy or real events that are all normally very absurd, and just for fun, see how they would play out. Now in today's battle, we'll be putting up the armies of World War I versus the skaven from Warhammer Fantasy. Now to set this battle, and to make it possible and make it easier to explain, we need to set some ground rules. Now, for the Skaven, I have decided to give them a population of 4 billion, which will outnumber the population of World War I by at least 3 to 1. As for the human faction, we'll be giving them 4 years to prepare, and they'll have all the technology and equipment that they did throughout the duration of the war. Our Skaven rat friends will have access to everything that they did, or rather what the other factions had, throughout Warhammer Fantasy, such as the dwarven helicopters and the tanks. And to make things fair for the humans, we're not going to be giving the Skaven any missiles, let's say that's going to destroy the moon. I'm not giving the humans any nuke, and I don't want this to be, well, a scenario that they can't possibly win. I'm not giving the humans any nukes, so I'm not giving the rats a missile that can destroy the moon. Now the Skaven cities will be underground, and they also will have access to their warp stone. And I will not be giving them, let's say, a rocket that can go and destroy the moon, because this wouldn't be much of a scenario if it did. I have biases more towards World War I, because I know a hell of a lot about it, but I also have my biases towards the Skaven for other various reasons. Now, to get into the meat of this discussion, we're going to have to be looking at their economy, and particularly the Skaven's medieval-like economy, and steampunk, and how a lot of their designs really suck. Nowadays, we live in a globalized economy. It makes it much easier to build something like a modern computer that can take up to thousands of parts much easier. And each one of these pieces will require some form of specialization. And the problem with the Skaven is that they live in a feudalistic, apocalyptic hellscape what doesn't really encourage the kind of investment that allows for specialization. By the time of World War I, most of Europe was already in a form of specialization that allows them to easily mass produce many weapons. And they already had the frame and foundation that made industrialization very easy. If we use an example throughout history, we can look at Japan, who had the perfect storm of everything that they would need to industrialize, and it still took a monumental Herculean effort to compete with European powers. It took decades for them to get on their level. Another point I'm going to be making is what I like to call the Archimedes effect. Now, I'm pretty sure something like this already exists and has another name for it, but I'm lazy, so I'm sticking with my terminology, the Archimedes effect. Now, Archimedes was an absolute mad lad that invented the most craziest contraptions that humanity's ever seen. He built a death laser that burnt many of the sails of the Romans in the Second Punic War. Now, it is important to note that he did all this in a non-industrialized and non-specialized society. He did all this by himself. Now, I would like to use the infamous word of Howard Stark. He is a man before his time. Now, the reason that I bring up industrialization, from what I've been able to see of the Skaven, that most of their society is not industrialized. Now, the reason that I don't think that they're fully industrialized is on the fact that they live in a land that makes Fallout 4 look far more pleasant, and being in a constant state of war isn't very good for investment. And this now leads me to my next point, steampunk. Now, on the surface, steampunk looks really cool. The problem is, if any firearms expert, or any person who had an expert on the field, saw what steampunk was emulating, they would shit themselves. Now, my theory behind why most steampunk looks the way that they do is that they don't live in a standardized, properly industrialized society, and they have to make do with what they have on them. A lot of steampunk designs is what I like to call the back alley horror. Do you trust her to be completely clean? And do you trust this equipment from this back alley scientist to work well and efficient as the commercial product? If you were to get, let's say, a 9mm pistol that was steampunk, it looks cool, but chances are that it might explode in your face. However, if I had to choose, I would choose to get the one made by Smith & Wesson in our modern era, rather than wherever the hell this thing came from. Now let's go talk about the human faction for a change. Now there is a bit of a perception that the people of the late 19th century and early 20th century that they would have an extreme disability fighting hand-to-hand combat against, let's say, people that have spears and swords and stuff. But I would like to counter saying that there is historical examples where we can see this absolutely not being the case. Look at the poor peasant farmers in the Japanese Meiji Restoration, that we can see that they easily held their own against the samurai, one of the most well-trained warriors in all of human history. And if we also look at the Anglo-Zulu Wars, and let's note about the Zulus, they were essentially the Spartans of Africa. 150 British officers did manage to hold off over 4,000 Zulus. Now, part of the reason why they did so well was on the grounds that they were carrying a weapon that was a hybrid of a spear and a gun and very tight Napoleonic formations. Pretty hard to beat that with spears and sword. One thing I want to bring up real quickly is that the humans would be far better at strategy. Now, I'm not an expert on skaven tactics, but one of the things that the skaven seems to use the most is overwhelm your enemy and shoot through your own men if your own men is an inconvenience to you or in their life.
Line of fire, my lord! Move around the flank to get a clear shot at the enemy! Aye! Wretched warlock! We can shoot man-things! Our rat-kin are in the way! You fought for right! Just shoot him down! Yes! Great smart plan, Chief!
Now, regardless of what time, what year, or no matter what the Skaven is doing, they always seem as though they are high on some serious crack. Now, before we get into the battle, I would like to discuss one more thing. The thing that the Skaven seem to be lacking the most is, well, a navy. And by the time that World War I hits, navies are ridiculous. And since, well, don't really have a navy, well, I think the sea lanes are going to be pretty safe for the duration of this war. So our war will begin on the 11th day of the 11th month. At 1919 will be the beginning of our conflict. Now the Skaven come out of their little holes and the tens of millions and begin to assault heavily fortified cities, towns, and location that is of strategical value to the humans. Now these trenches in our timeline are super fortified that has far more in common with the marginal line than it does anything else. And I mean super fortified. I mean everyone, to your mom, to the old man who runs a bakery shop, to a dog, they're all in there. Now this is a global conflict, and countries that had not as much involvement, such as Japan, Spain, and Switzerland, are going to be on the human faction in this, and will be contributing through the war. Now, the first maybe year of this war is fought very conventionally by the Skaven, because they do have enough gear and equipment to go fight off the humans, but they will quickly run into a resource problem, not being an industrialized society, while the humans are starting to produce tanks in the tens of thousands. And these assaults on these trenches and human fortifications are far bloodier, far massive in scale than the fighting we previously saw in World War I. Now either side won't have much of a food problem, because, well, the Skaven's numbers are going to rapidly decrease very much over time, and while the humans are going to have plenty of rat meat to eat, those propaganda departments can convince them that the food tastes like chicken. Now, plague is initially going to do a lot of damage, but luckily the humans do know what exactly germ theory is, and for the humans, they're going to be using gas, a lot of it. Now the problem is with the Skaven is that gas masks aren't cheap.
And while they're not going to have a whole lot to put on, let's say about 4 billion of them, so gas for the humans will be super effective on the Skaven. Now in the less industrialized regions, combat will be pretty traditional. The Skavens will win most of the battles, but in those places, such as China or India, expect some massive guerrilla warfare. Now both sides, through the duration of the war, will be using the enemy's weaponry. The problem is with the Skaven is that it's going to be pretty hard to keep up with the manufacturing required to reuse and repurpose a lot of these inventions. And as for the humans, well, a lot of that metal that the Skaven's leaving behind is going to be really useful to them. Now one thing that the Skaven is clearly going to have an advantage in is the digging, the drilling, using their warp stones to get underneath the towns and city. But the thing is that the humans won't be completely caught off guard by this, because digging, and in particular mine warfare, has been going on for about arguably maybe thousands of years, but certainly in the First World War they used a lot of it. I mean, for God's sakes, Britain literally dug a massive mine under one of the German trenches and caused one of the largest human explosions in human history. Now the best way to imagine what mining warfare is kind of going to be like in this scenario, kind of imagine Metro 2033. It's going to be very ridiculous. Now I would like to mention that there is an assassin clan that, despite them being giant rats, they can move around undetected and, well, kill a lot of their intended targets. However, the humans wouldn't be completely caught off guard by this because they can run counter-intel, and let's face it, a lot of the Skaven couldn't tell the difference between a prime minister and a president. And worst case scenario, the humans can put them on a boat. I mean, I don't think rats are very good swimmers, and, well, good luck keeping up with the Royal Navy. Now, I'll be wrapping up this scenario because, well, I'm well behind schedule and this video has gone on long enough, but there's plenty enough to talk about theorize, and well, I like to say that I am probably wrong putting up a fictional, let's say, faction up against, well, a real, well, live faction, so if you think the Skaven will win, well, then you're probably right, but either way, this made a fun discussion. But I will give the victory to the humans because, well, their weapons aren't, well, made by back alley scientists. They have far better strategies, and see, the technological advantages with the industrialized advantages would overwhelm their superior numbers. If there is one thing that World War I proved, is that you just can't overwhelm a trench conventionally by using, let's say, infantry and artillery shells. There is a lot of time, preparation, and strategy that goes over to overwhelming a trench. Case in point, look at Verdun and most of the battles throughout World War I. Now, the Skaven could probably overrun most of the Warhammer Fantasy universe if they worked together. But it is important to note that at the end of the day, many normal, basic bitch people do hold their own against the Skaven on a regular basis. Now, I'm pretty sure there are many life lessons that we have learned through this video, but the thing that we can take away the most is that at the end of the day, you can't beat mechanized bikemen. Now, this video isn't 100% meant to be taken seriously, and I admit that I am probably wrong, but feel free to disagree. Your comments will only help me improve my videos, for better or for worse. And I would also like to say this video was a lot of fun to make, and it was an acid trip of an idea, and I'm just glad to see that at least my experience on the subject of World War I and other things have led me to at least make a semi-entertaining video about Ratman trying to overwhelm, well, Verdun. Now, this is just a starting video to my whole channel. I don't know exactly what it would be, but I do hope to consistently grow it over time. And with your help and support, I hope I get to see that dream one day come true. Thank you.